In a quiet corner of town, where thunder echoes through empty streets and broken dreams hide behind every closed door, a single father named Jack pulls over in a downpour to help a stranger stranded in the rain. He doesn't know her name. He doesn't ask for thanks. But the woman he shelters that stormy night isn't just anyone. She's the daughter of a billionaire empire. And she never forgot the kindness of a man who had nothing but gave everything. What happens when kindness meets legacy? When a woman used to power meets a man defined by love? This is the story of what happens when a single dad helps a rich woman in the rain, and she returns to make him her husband. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sky cracked open like a wound as Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, the wipers slashing across the windshield in a frantic rhythm. Rain hammered the truck's rusted hood, drumming louder than the growl of the old engine. Every red light felt like a personal insult, another minute lost. He leaned forward, peering through the blurred glass as lightning lit up the sky like a warning. He was late. Again. His boots were soaked through from changing a flat tire at the end of his shift, and the dampness had crept up into his bones, but that didn't matter. Not now. Emma was waiting. She always waited. The dashboard clock blinked 5:47 p.m., 15 minutes past when he was supposed to pick her up from the community center. Guilt settled in his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. She'd be standing by the chain-link fence, that tiny purple umbrella barely holding up, her shoes probably soaked, clutching her school backpack to her chest like it was armor. As he pulled onto their street, Jack spotted her, just a small figure beneath a crooked umbrella, her blonde hair slicked to her cheeks. The wind yanked at her coat, nearly spinning her off balance. She didn't cry. She never did. But the way she stood there, still, shivering, looking down at the wet sidewalk like it had betrayed her, made something twist in Jack's chest. He slammed the gear into park and jumped out, the rain immediately soaking his flannel shirt. "Em!" he shouted, jogging up to her. She looked up and smiled, like she hadn't been waiting in the cold for nearly an hour. "It's okay, Daddy," she said, her voice small but certain. "I knew you'd come." That broke him more than any angry words could. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her, shielding her from the worst of the storm with his body. "I was just counting the lightning," she said softly. "Every time it flashed, I'd imagine you getting closer." Jack swallowed hard. He wasn't the best dad. He couldn't give her much. But he'd never let her stand in the storm alone. Not ever again. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a relentless wall of water that blurred the lines between pavement, sky, and everything in between. Jack squinted through the windshield, headlights barely cutting through the gray. The back roads were nearly deserted, just trees swaying violently in the wind, and the occasional flash of water pooling across the asphalt. That's when he saw it. A car, sleek and silver, sat stranded on the side of the road like it had been dropped there by mistake. Its hazard lights blinked weakly through the storm, casting dull amber pulses into the downpour. But it wasn't the car that caught his eye. It was the figure standing beside it. A woman, barely more than a silhouette in the storm, stood outside, soaked to the bone. Her coat clung to her frame, dark with water, and her hair stuck to her face in heavy strands. One arm was raised, holding a useless phone that she glanced at like it might suddenly work through sheer desperation. The other clutched her coat tightly at the collar, as if it could hold in the warmth that clearly wasn't there. Jack slowed to a crawl, tires splashing through a shallow pool. He looked at Emma, asleep in the back seat, her head bobbing gently with the motion. He hesitated for half a second. He was already behind schedule. Emma needed dinner. The rent check was late. He didn't have time to play Good Samaritan. But then he looked back at the woman. She wasn't waving. She wasn't yelling for help. She just stood there, like the rain had poured straight through her and taken whatever pride she had with it. Jack sighed, pulled over, and rolled down his window. "Hey!" he called out, leaning into the storm. "You okay?" She turned, startled, eyes wide and mascara streaked. There was something in her expression, relief and something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or fear. She stepped closer, lips trembling. "My car, it just died. I tried calling for a tow, but—" She broke off, holding up her phone, which blinked the dreaded no-service icon. Jack nodded toward the truck. "Get in, you're going to freeze out here." She hesitated, eyeing him for a beat, but the cold made the decision for her. She climbed in. Neither of them knew it, but that one moment, that one gesture, was about to change everything. Jack grabbed the flannel jacket off the passenger seat the moment she climbed in, draping it over her shoulders without a word. The heat was already cranked up, humming through the vents, but she was shaking too hard for it to matter. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the coat around herself. Her hands were cold, pale. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight like she was trying to keep something from cracking. Jack glanced at her again. She wasn't the kind of person you saw often around here. Her coat was expensive, or had been before the rain turned it limp. Her boots, now caked with roadside mud, looked like they cost more than his truck. She didn't belong on a back road in the middle of a thunderstorm, and she sure as hell didn't look like someone used to being rescued. "Pop the hood," he said gently, pulling the truck back into park. She blinked, surprised, like she'd already forgotten why she was there. It's not the engine," she stammered. "It's a flat. I hit something. I didn't see it until—" Jack nodded, already opening the door. "Stay put. I'll take a look." Rain immediately slammed against him, soaking his shirt to the skin in seconds. The mud sucked at his boots as he circled the car, squatting by the back tire. Sure enough, the thing was shredded. Probably a chunk of broken glass from the construction site 2 miles back. He grabbed the jack and spare from her trunk, clean, unused, and got to work. No complaints, no questions, just muscle memory and focus. Inside the truck, the woman sat curled in the oversized flannel like it was armor. Her breath fogged the window as she watched him, something unreadable in her eyes. When he opened the door 20 minutes later, soaked and streaked with grease, he said only, "You're good to go." She stared at him for a second, then quietly, "Why'd you stop?" Jack blinked. "Because it was raining. Because you looked cold. Because someone should." No flair, no chivalry, just a simple truth. And maybe that's why she couldn't stop looking at him, because in her world, kindness usually came with a price tag. But his didn't. The rain had dulled to a steady patter by the time Jack closed her trunk, wiping his hands on a rag he'd found tucked behind his seat. His shirt clung to his back, soaked clean through, but he didn't mind, not really. The tire was fixed. The car sat level now, humming softly as it idled, headlights still cutting through the misty dark. She stepped out of the truck slowly, his flannel still wrapped around her shoulders like she wasn't ready to give it up just yet. Her eyes followed his every move, calm, focused, quiet. There was a stiffness to the way she stood, like she was used to being in control, used to giving orders. But now she just watched him like she didn't know what to say. "Should be good now," Jack said, nodding toward the car. "Just keep it under 50 until you get the tire replaced." She opened her mouth, hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a wallet, sleek, black, clearly expensive. She held out a $100 bill, crisp and dry despite the weather. "Please," she said, "I can't just let you—" Jack didn't even look at the money. He shook his head, taking a slow step back. "I'm not doing this for a tip," he said simply. "Helping's just the right thing to do." She stared at him like she didn't quite understand the words, like they didn't compute in the world she came from. Her voice lowered. "You don't even know who I am." He gave a half smile and shrugged. "Doesn't matter." The silence between them stretched out, filled only by the soft whisper of rain on asphalt. Then, with a small nod, she folded the bill back into her wallet, slipped inside her car, and closed the door. Jack stepped back onto the curb, watching as she shifted into gear. The luxury car pulled away slowly, the red taillights glowing like embers in the fog. He didn't ask her name, didn't chase after her, didn't expect anything. And yet, As he climbed back into his truck and glanced at the empty road ahead, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that he hadn't seen the last of her. Not even close. The front door creaked open with a groan, the kind of sound old hinges made when they'd seen too many winters and not enough oil. Jack stepped inside, rainwater dripping from his jacket, boots squelching on the worn welcome mat. The house smelled like damp wood and childhood, some mix of old coffee, vanilla crayons, and the faint scent of laundry soap that never quite washed out of the curtains. Emma looked up from the couch, where she'd cocooned herself in a fleece blanket. The TV flickered softly, volume low, casting a pale glow across her round face. "Did the lady get home okay?" she asked sleepily, rubbing at her eyes. Jack nodded, peeling off his jacket and tossing it over the back of a chair. "Yeah, car's good as new, or, good enough for now." Emma sat up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her hair was still damp, a few curls plastered to her forehead. Jack grabbed a towel from the hallway and knelt beside her, gently drying her off. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. "A little?" He made his way into the tiny kitchen, flipping on the single overhead light that buzzed before finally glowing to life. There wasn't much in the pantry. There never was. But there was a can of chicken noodle, dented and dusty, and a half loaf of white bread that wasn't too far gone. He worked in silence, pouring the soup into a pot, heating it on the ancient stove, its coil burners ticking and warming like a slow heartbeat. Emma shuffled in behind him, dragging the blanket around her shoulders like a cape. "Can I have the big spoon?" she asked. Jack smirked. "You always get the big spoon." The two of them ate at the kitchen table, scratched wood, one leg shorter than the others, sharing slices of toast and laughing at the way the noodles looked like worms. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Jack watched his daughter giggle with soup on her chin and felt that same ache in his chest. He didn't have money. He didn't have security. But in this moment, with a can of soup and a child's laugh filling the room, he had something else. A reason to keep going. Life didn't stop. It didn't get easier. But somehow they made it work. The gates opened with a silent slide, the sensors recognizing her car long before she reached them. The long drive to the Carrington estate was lined with old oaks and rain-slicked cobblestone, every detail meticulously curated to exude quiet power. But as Isabelle pulled her car into the circular drive, the tires crunching against the stones, the silence felt heavier than usual. Lights glowed from the windows of the mansion ahead, tall, symmetrical, perfect. Every inch of it was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind the world that the Carrington name wasn't just wealthy, it was untouchable. Isabelle stepped out of her car, her soaked heels clicking against the stone as she hurried up the steps. A staff member, James or Jonathan, she couldn't even remember anymore, opened the door before she reached it. "Miss Carrington," he said with a nod, "we didn't expect you back tonight." "I changed my mind," she replied, brushing past him, her voice clipped. Her hair was still damp, her clothes clinging to her in places the heated air couldn't dry fast enough. She moved through the house quickly, past oil paintings and grand staircases, through halls lined with antique furniture she'd never cared for. The walls echoed, always had. Even when she was a child running barefoot through these same halls, it had felt like a museum more than a home. Upstairs, she peeled off the wet clothes and changed into something soft, oversized. Not designer, just comfortable. She curled up on the corner of the massive sectional in the sitting room, a fire flickering half-heartedly behind the glass. But her mind wasn't here. It was still out there, on that dark back road, in the passenger seat of a rusted-out pickup truck that smelled like engine grease and winter. Jack. The way he didn't flinch when she looked ruined, the way he offered his coat without asking her name, the way he refused her money like it insulted him. He was quiet strength, rough hands and warm eyes, a man who lived a life she couldn't begin to understand. And yet, somehow, she couldn't stop thinking about him. In a world where everything came with a price tag, he was the first thing that didn't. And it haunted her. The next morning, Isabelle sat at the far end of a long marble table in her private study, untouched coffee cooling beside a stack of reports she hadn't bothered to read. The rain had stopped hours ago, but she still felt it in her bones, like a memory that wouldn't dry. She stared at her phone for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't have his name, didn't have a license plate, didn't even know the name of the town, really, just a stretch of road that wasn't on her usual route, a shortcut her GPS had suggested when traffic had snarled outside the city. It was supposed to be temporary, a detour, but it had become something else. Finally, she tapped a contact. The phone rang twice. Isabelle, came the voice on the other end, polite, neutral, and very expensive. Her assistant, Ava. "I need a favor," Isabelle said, eyes fixed on the raindrops still sliding down the window. "Of course." "I want you to find someone for me, a man. I don't have a name. I don't have much of anything, just a location, a general area." There was a pause, but not the questioning kind. Ava had learned long ago not to ask Isabelle Carrington why, only how. "Send me what you know. I'll get started." She ended the call, then sat back in her chair, suddenly unsure if she'd made a mistake. What was she even doing? People didn't look for strangers they met on the side of the road, not in her world. In her world, chance meetings were stories you told over wine and forgot the next morning. But she hadn't forgotten. Hours passed. Her phone stayed silent. By evening, she got the first report. "We checked local businesses near the construction site. No one matching the description. No security footage, no receipts. We'll expand the radius tomorrow." Nothing. She told herself, it didn't matter, that he was probably just another working man who disappeared into his life after doing a good deed, that she should let it go. But she couldn't. Because somewhere out there, a man had helped her when he had no reason to. No agenda, no name. And that made him unforgettable. The notice came on a Wednesday, tacked to the bulletin board at the garage, printed in bold black ink, like the words weren't about to make someone's life harder. Jack read it 3 times, jaw clenched, heart sinking. Effective immediately. Due to budget adjustments, all part-time shifts will be reduced by 10 hours per week. We appreciate your understanding. Understanding. Jack could barely make rent as it was. 10 hours meant less food, more overtime at a second job he didn't even have, and a growing list of bills with due dates that weren't interested in his excuses. He didn't say anything, just pulled on his gloves and went back to work, wrenching at a rusted alternator like it had personally offended him. That night, Emma sat at the kitchen table with a school supply list spread out in front of her. Her handwriting was big and careful, circling items with a pink marker, folders, pencils, watercolor paints, something called fine-tip dry erase markers that cost more than they should have. "Mrs. Talbot says we need everything by next Friday," she said, glancing up at him. "But I told her you'd probably get them sooner." Jack smiled. Not the real kind, the kind parents give when they're trying not to let their kids see the cracks. "Of course," he said. "We'll knock that list out this weekend." Emma beamed. "Can we get the glitter glue too? It wasn't on the list, but—" "Absolutely." He didn't have the heart to tell her they were already down to powdered milk and spaghetti, that the rent check had bounced last month and the landlord was starting to tap his foot, that he'd seen the price of glue and it wasn't glittering at all. After she went to bed, Jack sat on the edge of the couch staring at the ceiling. The walls of their tiny house felt tighter than usual, like the air itself was closing in. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. But he'd figure it out. He always did. Not because he had a plan, but because he had no other choice. He was Emma's world, and there wasn't room for failure in hers. The week dragged by like wet concrete. Jack picked up extra shifts at the scrapyard, hauling rusted metal with blistered palms and sore shoulders. Emma's supply list stayed taped to the fridge, untouched, the pink circles she'd drawn around her favorite items like little reminders of what he hadn't yet delivered. He didn't tell her about the notice from the electric company. He just kept working, kept smiling, kept pretending the walls weren't closing in. The rain returned on a Friday, as if the sky had been waiting for the right moment to cave in. Jack stood at the stove, stirring a pot of watery oatmeal for dinner, when he heard it. 3 knocks, sharp, steady. Not the landlord, not a delivery, not someone from work, no one ever came by in the rain. He wiped his hands on a towel and moved toward the front door, heart ticking a little faster for reasons he didn't understand yet. When he opened it, she was standing there, soaked, just like before. Her coat was a darker shade of gray now, clinging to her like the rain had been chasing her for miles. Hair stuck to her cheeks, lashes dripping, but this time her eyes met his without hesitation. "Hi," she said, her voice soft, unsure, but unmistakably hers. Jack stared for a beat too long, stunned. "You again?" he said, voice low. She gave a half-laugh, breath fogging in the cold air. "Yeah, I guess I have a habit of getting lost in the rain." For a moment, neither of them moved. The storm poured around them, wind curling through the porch like fingers. Jack should have said something, asked why she was here, what she wanted. But instead he stepped aside. "Come in." She walked past him slowly, leaving a trail of raindrops on the old floorboards. He shut the door behind her and turned. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would want to," she replied, voice almost a whisper. But her smile, small, vulnerable, real, said everything else. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt something shift inside him. Hope. Jack stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, as the rain whispered against the windows. Isabelle had peeled off her soaked coat and hung it on the back of a chair, her blouse underneath, clinging to her like the storm hadn't finished with her yet. Emma peeked out from the hallway in her socked feet, curious, blinking at the stranger in their kitchen like she was a character from a book who'd stepped out of the pages. "You're the lady from the car," Emma said, voice soft but certain. Isabelle turned, smiling warmly. "I am, and you must be Emma." Jack cleared his throat. Go wash up for dinner." Emma gave him that look, half defiance, half mischief, but turned and padded off. Isabelle waited until the girl disappeared into the bathroom before speaking again. "I meant to come sooner," she said, fingers lacing together in front of her. "I was trying to find you, but you're hard to track down." Jack gave a small, dry laugh. "That's by design." She stepped closer, not enough to invade his space, but enough to make her presence undeniable. "You helped me. You didn't have to, and I wasn't exactly gracious about it." "You said thank you," Jack replied, voice flat. "That's not what I mean." There was a beat of silence. Her gaze dropped for a moment, and when she looked back up, her voice had changed. Softer, less polished, real. "I saw the school list on your fridge," she said. "I'd like to take care of it." Jack's jaw tensed. "You don't need to do that." "I know I don't, but I want to." He stared at her, uncertain. She didn't look like someone trying to flex power. There was no arrogance, no pity, just sincerity, and something else in her eyes, something tired, familiar. "It's just school supplies, Jack, not a loan, not charity." He hesitated, pride clashing with practicality. "I don't like owing people," he muttered. "You won't," she said. "Call it a thank you for the coat and the kindness." He studied her for a long moment before finally giving a short nod. "Fine." Isabelle smiled, something small and unguarded blooming across her face. For the first time in a long while, Jack let someone help. And for the first time in her life, Isabelle gave without needing control. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and something toasted, though the actual meal was nothing more than grilled cheese and tomato soup from a can. Jack moved through the motions with practiced ease, flipping sandwiches in a pan that had lost its nonstick years ago, while Emma set the table with mismatched plates and 2 forks too many. Isabelle offered to help, but Jack waved her off. "You're a guest," he said, though there was no sharpness in it, just the quiet weight of a man used to doing it all himself. Isabelle stood awkwardly near the entryway, watching them work in tandem. Emma chattered about her art project at school, about how glitter glue should be on every school supply list, even if the teachers disagreed. Jack responded with grunts and nods, but there was a softness in the way he listened, like every word mattered. When they finally sat down, the food was simple, steaming, imperfect, and somehow exactly right. "So," Emma said between bites, her voice cautious but curious, "what do you do?" Isabelle blinked, surprised by the directness. I work with cars too," she said, glancing at Jack, who raised an eyebrow. "Well, in a different way. I help run a company that builds them." Emma's eyes widened. "Like race cars?" "Not quite, but fast ones, yes." Jack smirked. "She's being modest. She's got the kind of car that can outrun airplanes." Isabelle laughed, a short, unguarded sound that filled the small kitchen like sunlight through dusty blinds. She looked down at her sandwich, then around the room, the old cabinets, the chipped countertops, the taped-up school projects on the fridge. It was nothing like the world she came from, but it felt like everything she never had. "Do you eat like this every night?" she asked suddenly. Jack shrugged. "Depends on how late I get home. Sometimes it's cereal, sometimes toast. Tonight's a feast." Isabelle smiled, her throat tightening in a way she didn't expect. She wasn't used to this kind of warmth that didn't come from money or status or curated surroundings. This was real. And as she laughed at Emma's terrible knock-knock jokes and accepted a second helping of soup, she realized something terrifying and wonderful. She didn't want to leave. The gate opened like the mouth of some giant beast. Silent, smooth, automatic. Jack's truck rumbled through it with a cough of exhaust, its rust-stained frame a glaring contrast against the manicured hedges and glossy stone driveway. Emma pressed her nose to the window, eyes wide, the reflection of the Carrington estate stretching across the glass like a dream too big to fit inside her head. "Is this a museum?" she whispered. Jack gave a quiet huff. "Nope, just someone's house." Emma giggled, but Jack didn't laugh. His hands were tight on the wheel, his knuckles pale. Everything around them felt too clean, too symmetrical, like one wrong step might get them asked to leave. When they parked, a man in a tailored suit opened Jack's door. "Welcome, Mr. Turner." Jack hesitated. No one had called him that since his daughter's teacher at parent conferences. The man didn't smile, just stepped back, waiting for Jack to climb out. Emma hopped down after him, clutching his hand like she thought she might float away if she let go. Isabelle was waiting by the front entrance, dressed in something simple and elegant. Slacks, a silk blouse, but even simple looked like royalty on her. She smiled the second she saw them, and for a brief moment the entire place seemed a little less intimidating. "I'm glad you came," she said, voice soft, eyes landing on Emma first. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Inside, the estate was all marble and glass, soft lighting and silence. The kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from absence. Jack walked behind Isabelle, his boots echoing awkwardly across the pristine floors. He kept brushing his shirt down, like he could make it cleaner just by touching it. Emma, meanwhile, was enraptured. She stared up at the vaulted ceilings, traced her fingers along gold-framed art, gasped at the hallway lined with books taller than she was. "Daddy, they have an elevator in their house," she whispered. "An actual elevator." Jack managed a small smile. "Yeah. Fancy, huh?" But his eyes stayed wary. This wasn't his world. Not the staff nodding with trained neutrality. Not the walls that looked untouched by time or trouble. And though Isabelle moved through it like it was nothing, Jack couldn't help but wonder if this house, this world, was big enough to hold someone like him, or if he'd always feel like a visitor. The offer came over coffee. They were sitting on the back terrace of the Carrington estate, a sweeping view of the distant city below, and gardens so perfect they looked painted. Emma chased a butterfly through the trimmed hedges, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Jack sat stiffly in a wrought iron chair that probably cost more than his entire kitchen, one hand wrapped around a porcelain cup he hadn't realized was refillable. Isabelle sat across from him, her legs crossed, an untouched cup in front of her. She'd been quiet for a while, like she was weighing something carefully. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her voice steady but soft, "about your work, about everything you've done with so little." Jack glanced up at her, wary. He didn't like where this was going. He'd heard that tone before. It came right before someone offered help that came with strings, or worse, with pity. "I know this might sound forward," she continued, "but I want to invest in you. I could help you open your own garage, a real one, with your name on the door, your tools, your team, everything you need." The words hit him like a slap and a lifeline at once. He didn't respond immediately, just stared at her, his jaw tight. "Jack," she said, gentler now, "you fix cars better than half the people I've hired in my company's top-tier division. And you care. That matters." He set the cup down slowly, the clink louder than it should have been. "I appreciate the gesture," he said, his voice low, "but I'm not some charity project." Her face fell, just slightly. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" he snapped, then immediately regretted the sharpness. He exhaled. "You're from a different world, Isabelle. A world where you can throw money at things and make them change. I don't live in that world. I can't. I've spent my whole life building from scratch. I can't just skip the hard parts because someone felt generous." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jack stood up, eyes cast toward the garden where Emma twirled in the sunlight. "You've got a good heart," he said, "but I don't need someone to fix my life for me." Then he turned and walked away. Because for all the things Jack Turner could stomach, kindness, struggle, even loneliness, what he couldn't take was the feeling that he didn't earn the ground he stood on. The fundraiser was held in the town's old community hall, a building with creaky floors, folding chairs, and the smell of lemon-scented wood polish clinging to its walls. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even particularly well organized. But the heart of the town beat there that night, pulsing in laughter, music, and the low hum of voices trading stories over lukewarm punch. Jack hadn't planned on going, not really. He didn't own a suit, just a clean shirt and his nicest pair of jeans. But Emma begged him. Her class had made decorations, and she wanted him to see them. So he showed up, half reluctant, fully unprepared. And then Isabelle walked in. She wasn't in heels or anything extravagant, just a deep green dress that moved when she did, soft and simple. But the room shifted when she entered, like someone had quietly turned the world on its axis. People glanced, whispered. Jack watched. She found him near the refreshment table, where he stood sipping from a paper cup like it might shield him from the discomfort crawling up his neck. She smiled, that careful, almost teasing smile, and said, "You clean up nice." He gave a small grunt. "Didn't know billionaires came to small-town potlucks?" "I didn't know small-town mechanics danced," she said. "I don't," he replied flatly. But when the music changed, something slow, something old and full of longing, she extended her hand, and he took it. On the dance floor, under strings of sagging white lights and the gentle gaze of curious neighbors, Jack placed one hand cautiously on her waist, the other holding hers just a little too tight. Isabelle stepped closer than he expected, her eyes never leaving his. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Every breath, every slight shift in movement, spoke louder than words. His fingertips on her back said he wasn't sure what this was. The way she leaned into him said she didn't care. The song played on. They moved like people who had nothing figured out, but everything unfolding between them. Jack didn't smile. Isabelle didn't laugh. But the look in their eyes said more than either of them was ready to admit. They didn't know what came next, only that something had already begun. The first whisper came in the form of a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Jack noticed it the morning after the fundraiser when he stopped by the hardware store. The usual nod from Tom behind the counter was replaced with a tight-lipped glance, and the other customers seemed to linger longer than usual near the registers, not quite eavesdropping, but not minding their own business either. One of them, a man Jack had known for years, muttered something under his breath as Jack passed. Something like, "fishing outside your pond," followed by a chuckle that wasn't meant to be friendly. Jack didn't respond, just paid for his nails and oil filters and walked out without a word. But the heat in his chest stayed with him. By the end of the week, it wasn't just whispers, it was questions, stares, conversations that stopped when he entered a room. Isabelle's presence in their small, tight-knit town had already stirred things up, but now that she was showing up at his place, walking beside him at the fundraiser, standing too close in the checkout line, it was more than curiosity. It was judgment. He'd tried to brush it off. He'd lived under the weight of other people's opinions for most of his life. But it was different now. It wasn't just about him anymore. Emma came home from school unusually quiet on Friday. She dropped her backpack by the door and went straight to her room. Jack followed a few minutes later, knocking gently. "Hey, Em," he said. "Everything okay?" She didn't look at him, just stared at the coloring book in her lap. "Some kid said stuff," she mumbled, "about Miss Isabelle. Said she's only nice to us because she feels bad. Said she's going to leave and forget about you." Jack's heart clenched. He sat beside her slowly, not sure what to say, because part of him feared the same thing, that maybe he was just a break in her routine, a curiosity, a story she'd one day tell at a party. He didn't say that, though. Instead, he pulled Emma close, kissed the top of her head, and said, "People talk when they don't understand something good, but you and me? We don't need their permission to be happy." But even as he held her, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of the world they were building were already starting to crack. The next time Isabelle came by, the door stayed closed a little longer than usual before Jack opened it. He didn't smile, didn't offer her coffee like he normally would. Emma was at her friend's house, and the silence inside felt heavier than it should have. "I was in the area," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thought I'd stop by." Jack nodded but didn't move aside to let her in. "Yeah, listen, about that." She looked up at him, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Something wrong?" He stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. The air was dry and sharp, the kind of autumn chill that snuck up on you. He folded his arms, not because he was cold, but because it gave his hands somewhere to go. "I've been thinking," he said. Isabelle tilted her head. "That sounds serious." He didn't laugh. "This thing, whatever it is between us," he started, voice steady but low, "it's not going to work." She blinked. "Jack, where is this coming from?" "You don't belong here," he said, cutting straight through the small talk. "Not in this town, not in my life. You're trying to play house with people who have holes in their roof and overdue bills taped to the fridge." Her face fell, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, like a man locking a door from the inside. "I never said I belonged anywhere," she replied softly. "I just know I wanted to be here." Jack shook his head. "You're not the problem, Isabelle, but your world, it doesn't mix with mine. People are talking. Emma's getting teased at school, and me? I'm not cut out for whatever future you're walking toward." She stepped forward, her voice a whisper. "Then let me decide if I want to walk toward it alone." He didn't answer, just looked past her at the horizon, jaw clenched. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," he said finally. "I'm doing it because I've got a kid to protect, and because I don't want to wake up one day and realize I was just another distraction in a life that doesn't have room for mine." The silence between them stretched like wire, tight, fragile. Then Isabelle nodded once and walked away. Jack didn't go back inside for a long time. He stood there, watching her car disappear down the road, already regretting every word he'd meant to protect them with. The fire crackled low in the Carrington Library, casting gold across the walls, lined with first editions and glass-framed family portraits. Isabelle sat stiff-backed in one of the armchairs, her fingers clenched around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Across from her, her father stood by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other swirling scotch in a crystal glass. "I'm not going to repeat myself," he said calmly. "End this, whatever it is with that mechanic, or you'll no longer be a part of this family's legacy." Isabelle didn't flinch. She didn't look away, but her stomach turned like someone had dropped a stone in it. "I didn't realize I had to choose between love and loyalty," she said quietly. He scoffed. "Love? Isabelle, come on. This isn't a novel. You met this man a month ago. He fixes tires and lives paycheck to paycheck. He's not your future." She stood slowly, carefully placing the teacup on the table like it might shatter under the weight of what was coming. "That man helped me when he didn't know who I was. He treated me like a person, not a title, not a bank account." "And you think that's enough?" her father snapped, all the calm bleeding from his voice. "You think that builds a life? You think that man can offer you the world we've worked for, fought for?" "No," she said, chin high. "But he can offer me something real, and I'd rather have that than all of this." He took a step forward, voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "If you walk out that door, Isabelle, you walk out of Carrington Enterprises. You walk away from the trust, the board seat, the future I built for you." She stared at him for a long time, something breaking quietly in her chest, not because she didn't expect this, but because a part of her had always hoped he might finally see her as more than a number on a balance sheet. "I'm not walking away from my future," she whispered. "I'm walking toward it." Then she turned and left, heels clicking down the marble hallway, echoing louder than any argument ever could. And when she stepped outside into the night, she felt the cold cut through her like a blade, but at least for once, it was her choice. The days rolled on same as they always had. Work, dinner, sleep, repeat. Jack woke before the sun, packed Emma's lunch, fixed what needed fixing at the shop, came home with grease under his nails and shoulders, weighed down by something heavier than labor. But something had shifted. The rhythm was the same, but the song had changed. The silence was everywhere now. It filled the gaps between his footsteps when he walked into the house. It sat across from him at the dinner table. It echoed in Emma's room, where she used to hum while coloring, but now just stared at her page, the crayon, barely moving. She hadn't asked about Isabelle in 2 days. That was worse than the questions. Jack caught her once in the living room, holding the scarf Isabelle had forgotten on the back of the couch. It still smelled faintly of her, like jasmine and rain. Emma didn't say anything, just folded it and placed it carefully into the basket by the door, like she knew it didn't belong there anymore. At night, Jack found himself staring at the ceiling long after Emma had fallen asleep, replaying things he hadn't let himself think about when she was around. The way Isabelle had looked at him like he mattered. The way she laughed at the smallest things, like grilled cheese and glitter glue, were new discoveries. The way she touched Emma's shoulder when she talked gently, like she belonged in that moment more than anyone else ever had. He told himself he'd made the right call, that he'd done what any decent father would do, protected his daughter from a world that didn't make room for people like them. He told himself Isabelle would forget. She'd move on, marry someone with stocks and polished shoes, someone who wouldn't track mud into her kitchen. But he hadn't forgotten. And she hadn't been someone you could just fold up and put away like a memory. So he kept going, making coffee, patching tires, tucking Emma in with a tired smile. Life returned to normal, but nothing about it felt real anymore, because normal wasn't supposed to feel this empty. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where time stretches just a little and the world outside the window feels like it's holding its breath. Jack was fixing the hinges on the back door, a job he'd put off too long, while Emma rummaged through the hallway closet looking for her missing sketchbook. "Dad?" she called after a minute, her voice curious, not urgent. "Yeah?" "There's something in the coat basket." Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stepped into the hallway, where Emma stood holding a folded piece of thick cream-colored paper. He recognized the envelope immediately. Isabelle's handwriting, clean, elegant. A name written across the front. Jack. "She left it?" Emma asked, eyes wide, searching his face. Jack nodded slowly, taking it from her like it might crumble in his hands. Must have dropped it the last time she was here. He hesitated, then sat down on the bottom step of the stairs. Emma sat beside him, legs swinging slightly, quiet as he opened the envelope. The paper inside was smooth, her handwriting fluid. Jack, I didn't know how to say this to your face without ruining something neither of us wanted to name out loud. So here it is, in the only way I know how to be honest, without interruption. Thank you. Not just for the coat or the tire or the dinner you called a feast. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. People look at me and see the last name, the money, the world I come from. They see control, power, polish. But you looked at me like I was just a woman in the rain, and I didn't realize how badly I needed that until you did. You made me feel small in the best way, not less than, just human. I don't know what this thing between us is, or what it could be, but I hope one day, if it's not too late, you'll see me again the way you did that night. No pretense, no fear. Just a girl you helped in the storm. Isabelle. Jack stared at the letter for a long time, heart thudding like it wanted to speak but didn't know the words. Beside him, Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. I miss her, she whispered. He closed his eyes. Yeah, he said. Me too. The rain came fast that evening, as if the sky had been holding something back for days and finally let go. Jack watched it slam against the windshield of his truck, wipers struggling to keep up, his knuckles white around the steering wheel. The road ahead was familiar in theory. He'd only been to the Carrington estate once, but it felt foreign now, wrapped in storm and doubt. Emma had gone to her cousin's for the night. He told her he needed to clear his head, that he'd be back before bedtime. She hadn't asked questions, just gave him a hug that lingered a little longer than usual. Now, miles from home, and soaked through his collar, Jack felt the old familiar tangle of fear and hope twist in his gut. He didn't have a speech rehearsed, didn't have a grand apology or a poetic plea. He wasn't even sure why he'd grabbed his keys and driven through the storm, only that sitting still had become unbearable. The memory of her letter still burned in his chest. You made me feel small in the best way. Just a girl you helped in the storm. He slowed as the gates came into view, headlights slicing through the sheets of rain. He half expected them to stay shut, as if they too had given up on second chances, but they opened slowly, soundless, just like before. The estate loomed ahead, dark glass catching the occasional flash of lightning, glowing like something unreachable. Jack pulled into the circular drive and killed the engine. The silence afterwards was deafening, broken only by the steady hammer of rain on the roof. He sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring at the front door like it might swallow him whole. What was he even doing? He wasn't part of her world. He'd told her that. He'd meant it. And yet, she'd left him that note. Not as Isabelle Carrington, the woman with the mansion and the inheritance, but as the girl in the rain. Jack opened the door and stepped out. The downpour soaked him instantly, just like the night they met. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. He walked slowly to her door, every step dragging 1,000 doubts behind it. He raised his hand and knocked. The door opened slowly, the warm light spilling out like a breath into the rain-soaked night. Isabelle stood there, barefoot, hair damp and loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jack," she said, not like a question, more like the air had been knocked from her lungs. He didn't speak right away. His clothes clung to him, soaked through, boots heavy with water. But his eyes were steady, clear, more certain than they'd ever been. "I didn't plan this," he said, voice low, rough from the cold. "Didn't rehearse anything. I couldn't stay away." Isabelle stepped back wordlessly, and he followed her inside. The door clicked shut behind him, and the storm stayed outside. The foyer was quiet, too quiet, as if the whole house was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would say next. "I got your letter," he said, water dripping onto the marble floor. "Read it about 5 times. Thought about it 100 more. She looked at him, trying to read the rest in his eyes. I told myself I was protecting Emma, he continued, that pushing you away was the right thing, that we didn't make sense. You with your world, me with mine. But that was a lie. Not to you, to myself. She took a small step closer, arms wrapped around her torso like a shield. I don't care what your last name is, Jack said, voice thick now. And you don't scare me with your big house or your board meetings or the way you walk into a room like it belongs to you. What scares me is how fast I got used to hearing your voice in my kitchen, watching you make Emma laugh, finding your scarf draped over my chair like it was meant to be there. He paused, breath catching. You're not too rich for me, and I'm not too poor for you. We just fit. Like two people who've been standing in the rain long enough to know what warmth really means. Isabelle blinked, eyes glassy. Jack took a step closer, inches from her now. I'm not asking for anything fancy, just a chance, to see what this is, with no titles, no conditions, just you and me. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, and when she reached up and touched his face, he knew he hadn't come through the rain for nothing. The office was silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the distant hum of rain against the windows. Isabelle stood in front of her father's desk, spine straight, chin high, fingers trembling only slightly at her sides. Across from her, Robert Carrington leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, eyes cold. The man who once taught her how to ride a bike without ever letting go now looked at her like she was a stranger. A mistake. You're serious, he said finally, voice flat. Yes, Isabelle replied, steady. I'm leaving the company. Effective, immediately. He laughed, bitter and humorless. And for what? A man who fixes carburetors in a garage that leaks when it rains? Her jaw tightened. A man who treats people like they matter, who looks at me and doesn't see leverage or weakness, who makes me feel more at home in a 2-bedroom house with peeling paint than I ever felt in this mausoleum. You're throwing away everything your mother and I built. No, she cut in. You built this. You shaped me to fit into a mold you designed before I could walk, and I did it. I played the part. I was the heir, the perfect daughter. But you never asked what I wanted. He stood now, looming behind the desk. You're walking away from your legacy. I'm walking towards something real, his voice sharpened. You walk out that door, Isabelle, and it closes behind you. No trust fund, no safety net. She nodded. Then I'll finally know what it feels like to stand on my own. He stared at her for a long moment, waiting for her to break. But she didn't. Her hands shook, her heart raced, but her eyes never left his. She turned without another word. By the time she stepped out into the hallway, the staff already knew. Eyes followed her, some sympathetic, some confused. None of it mattered. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Jack was waiting in his truck at the curb. She climbed in beside him, not looking back. Are you sure? He asked quietly. She smiled, full of something fragile but fierce. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And as he pulled away, she felt the weight of her father's world fall off her shoulders, piece by piece, until all that was left was her own. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning, nailed into place by Jack himself, with Emma holding the ladder steady below. Isabelle stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes bright, watching it all come together. The letters were simple, hand-painted by a local artist who Jack insisted on paying, even though the guy tried to do it for free. Rain and Wrench. The name had come from Emma, half joking one night at dinner. But it stuck. It meant something. Jack climbed down, wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and looked at the finished product. For a moment, no one said anything. The wind stirred, the scent of fresh-cut wood and motor oil hanging in the air. I still can't believe it's real, Isabelle said softly. Jack glanced at her, then at the building behind them. The garage wasn't flashy. It wasn't big, just 3 bays, a small office in the back, and a waiting area with second-hand chairs and a coffee machine that only worked if you jiggled the cord. But it was his. Theirs. It had taken months. Isabelle had put up the money, yes. but she never tried to take over. She sat with Jack at night, spread out on the floor with blueprints, letting him guide every detail, from the layout of the tool racks to the color of the walls. She didn't suggest automation or high-end tech. She listened. Jack had never built anything from scratch before, not like this. His hands were used to fixing, to repairing what others broke. But here, every bolt, every coat of paint, every decision was his own. They hired 2 mechanics from the next town over, young, hungry, grateful. Emma drew the first customer sign by hand and taped it to the front window with crooked letters that read, "Open soon, honesty included." At night, Jack would sit on the hood of a car in the lot, Isabelle beside him, watching the sky fade into stars, and he'd think about the way things used to feel impossible, distant, like dreams were for people with clean shoes and clean slates, but not anymore. Now the dream had grease under its nails, and it had a name. The first to come around was Mrs. Redford. She'd lived 3 doors down from Jack since Emma was in diapers, and hadn't said more than a polite hello in 2 years. But one morning, her old Buick sputtered and died in front of the post office, and Jack just happened to be driving by. He didn't ask, didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled over, popped the hood, and had it running before she finished her sentence. She baked a pie the next day, cherry, still warm, left it on the rain and wrench counter with a scribbled note, for the man who didn't ask questions. Word spread faster than rumors. Jack was quiet but steady, fair with his prices, always honest. He fixed things fast but never rushed. He gave advice even if it meant less business. And he didn't just help when there was money to be made. He helped because it was who he was. Isabelle, meanwhile, started volunteering at the town library. At first, people looked at her like she didn't belong, too polished, too perfect. But the kids didn't care. And neither did she. She sat cross-legged on the carpet with kindergartners during reading hour, her heels kicked off in the corner. She helped high school students with math homework at the back tables and stayed late when one of them confessed they couldn't concentrate at home because of the noise. She bought snacks. She brought notebooks. She listened. It wasn't grand gestures. It was consistency, presence. And slowly the town started to notice. At the grocery store, Jack no longer got sideways glances, just nods, questions about brake pads and engine ticks, and whether Isabelle might be offering another writing workshop next month. Even the old men at the diner stopped raising their eyebrows and started saving them a booth. One afternoon, Emma walked home from school holding hands with 2 other girls who used to tease her about the lady with the fancy car. Now they called Isabelle Miss Izzy and invited her to their science fair. The change wasn't loud. It was a slow turning of heads, a shifting of hearts. And it started not because Jack and Isabelle demanded to be accepted, but because they showed up, again and again, until no one could deny they belonged. The storm rolled in the way some memories do, sudden, electric, and impossible to ignore. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, slow and steady, like a drumbeat calling back the past. Rain tapped against the roof of the garage, soft at first, then heavier, until it became the kind of downpour that made you stop whatever you were doing and just listen. Jack stood under the awning of rain and wrench, the lights inside casting a warm glow behind him. The garage had closed an hour ago, but he hadn't gone home. He couldn't. Not yet. He turned the small velvet box in his hand for the 100th time, thumb brushing over the edges. Simple. No diamonds, no flash. Just a silver band, elegant and quiet. Like her. Inside the office, Isabelle was laughing at something Emma had said, her silhouette flickering behind the rain-streaked window. Jack watched her through the glass, chest aching in a way that was no longer pain, but still held the weight of something sacred. When the door opened and Isabelle stepped outside, umbrella forgotten, the rain caught in her hair, streaking down her cheeks like something the sky had borrowed from her heart. "You're going to catch a cold," she called, her voice soft, teasing. Jack didn't answer right away. He took a step toward her, the rain soaking into his shirt, the thunder curling in the sky like it was holding its breath. "I never told you," he said, "but I remember the exact moment you showed up that night, standing on the side of the road, drenched, pissed off, beautiful." She smiled, head tilted, unsure where he was going. "You came to me in the rain," he continued, stepping closer, the velvet box clutched tight in his hand. "And everything in my life changed after that. Every single thing." The rain poured harder. Isabelle stood frozen, eyes wide as he dropped to one knee, soaked to the bone but steady as stone. "I don't have a fancy speech. I just have this life, this garage, this daughter, and it's all better with you in it." He opened the box. "Stay forever." Isabelle's lips trembled as she nodded, eyes shining with tears that mixed with the storm. And when she whispered, "Yes," Jack stood and kissed her in the rain, just like the first night. Only this time, neither of them had anywhere else to be. The backyard had never looked so beautiful. Jack had borrowed white folding chairs from the community center, strung soft yellow lights along the fence, and covered the patchy grass with an aisle runner Emma picked out from the dollar store. Wildflowers, cut that morning from the fields behind the house, sat in mason jars on every table. There was no orchestra, no grand entrance, no pageantry. But it was perfect. It was theirs. The sun had just begun to dip low, casting everything in a soft golden haze. Guests filled the chairs in hushed excitement, neighbors, a few of Jack's co-workers from the garage, kids from Isabelle's reading group, and Mrs. Redford, who held a wrinkled handkerchief in one hand and a slice of lemon cake in the other. At the back of the yard, near the makeshift arch, Jack built with scrap wood and paint-stained hands, he stood in a clean shirt, collar tugged nervously. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He didn't care for speeches or ceremony. But when he looked up and saw Emma step into view, his breath caught. She wore a pale blue dress and carried a small bouquet of daisies. Her face beamed with pride and nerves as she held Isabelle's hand, guiding her gently down the aisle. Isabelle wore a simple white dress that fluttered at her ankles, hair loose and glowing in the sunlight. No veil, no diamonds, just joy written in every step. People stood, not because anyone told them to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. Emma stopped at the front, looked up at Jack, then turned to Isabelle and whispered, "She's ready." Laughter rippled softly, but Jack's eyes never left Isabelle's. "You sure?" he asked under his breath as she stepped closer. She nodded, voice catching. "More than ever." The ceremony was short. The vows were imperfect. Jack stumbled once, Isabelle cried twice, and Emma held their rings with trembling fingers. When they kissed, it wasn't about tradition or formality. It was about every choice that brought them to this day, every rainstorm, every no that led to this yes. And not a single person in that backyard left without tears in their eyes. The dog showed up a week after the wedding, skinny, skittish, soaked from a surprise summer storm, and with a limp in one leg that made Jack wince just watching him walk. Emma found him behind the garage, curled under the old scrap trailer, his eyes wary but desperate. Jack crouched low, speaking softly, palm out. Isabelle brought water. Emma brought crackers. By nightfall he was inside, asleep on a folded blanket in the corner of the living room. They named him Thunder, because of the rain and because Emma said he looked brave. He never left. Neither did the warmth. Morning started earlier now, Isabelle in the kitchen, hair tucked into a messy bun, reading the news while Emma sat on the counter, swinging her legs and licking jelly off her fingers. Jack brewed the coffee, poured 2 cups, one for him, one for her, without asking. It had become routine. In the evenings, Jack would come home with grease under his fingernails and a wrench in his back pocket. Isabelle would have her shoes kicked off, sitting on the floor beside Emma's bed, reading stories in voices that made Emma laugh until she hiccuped. And when the house went quiet, they sat out back under string lights, Thunder stretched out between them, the scent of engine oil mixing with jasmine from the flowerbed Isabelle had insisted on planting. At the garage, things shifted too. People didn't just come for repairs anymore, they came to talk, for advice, for help. A single mother from 2 blocks over started apprenticing under Jack, learning how to rebuild carburetors in between school runs. A retired vet came every Thursday just to sweep the shop and swap stories. Isabelle kept a bookshelf in the waiting area, free for kids. She called it Stories While You Wait, and filled it with tales of courage, adventure, and hope. Emma now knew the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench. She wore coveralls on Saturdays and asked questions with a seriousness that made Jack beam when he thought she wasn't looking. This wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was the life they'd built. One storm, one step, one choice at a time. The rain came heavy that night, just like it always did when the air felt too thick to breathe and the world needed cleansing. It tapped against the windows of rain and wrench in steady rhythm, soft at first, then stronger, until it became the kind of downpour that could stop time. Jack was in the back bay, rolling a tire into place, while the radio played old country songs beneath the hum of thunder. His hair had gone gray at the temples, his hands a little slower. But the way he moved, steady, deliberate, hadn't changed. Isabelle was in the front office, sorting through paperwork, glasses perched on her nose, Thunder curled asleep at her feet. The dog was older now, slower, with more white around his muzzle, but he still lifted his head every time the bell over the door chimed. Emma, 17 and taller now, sat on a stool near the tool bench, flipping through a manual for her school's electric car club, her hair tied back in a way that mirrored her dad's on long workdays. The knock at the door was faint at first, then again, louder. Jack wiped his hands and opened it to find a young couple on the porch, soaked, shivering. Their car, a small beat-up sedan, sat idling just off the curb, hazard lights blinking like tiny cries for help. The boy looked nervous, clutching a phone with no signal. The girl looked cold, mascara smudged, arms crossed over her chest. "Sorry to bother you," the boy said. "We got caught in the storm. Car's acting up, no reception." Jack looked at them, then back at the shop. "You've come to the right place." Isabelle was already behind him with a towel, ushering them inside, her voice calm and warm. Emma handed the girl a cup of tea like it was second nature. They got the car inside, popped the hood, and within minutes, Jack had diagnosed the issue, a loose connection, nothing serious. But he took his time, explained it slowly, showed the boy how to fix it for next time. When the couple was back in their car, warmed and grateful, Isabelle leaned against the doorway, watching them drive away through the curtain of rain. "You remember?" she asked. Jack nodded, staring into the storm. "I remember," he said. "It started just like this." And then he turned, took Isabelle's hand, and stepped back into the warmth of the garage they had built, together, one kindness at a time.